Aluminium Reviews.
The following are, in my opinion, the best screen adaptations of each of Jane Austen's famous novels. I'm not going to go in depth on why each one deserves the top spot. Instead, I'll give you a quick rundown of the criteria I've used to make the selections.
Adaptation, not inspired by.
Few would deny that we have some fun, modern retellings of these classic books, but this list is confined to the attempts of faithful representation.
Characters and story over style.
The essence of a Jane Austen novel rests in the genius of her characters and how they interact to weave a tale. An adaptation should always attempt to visually portray the world it resides in, but if the characters don't ring true, the rest is wasted effort.
Best, not favourite.
Whilst the versions on this list are most definitely some of my favourites, I also have favourites that stray too far to be called a faithful adaptation. In this case, best means the version that I think is closest to bringing the book to life. I'm also going to assume that if you're watching this, you're already familiar with the basic stories. The Sense and Sensibility made in 2008, with Hattie Morahan as Eleanor Dashwood, Dan Stevens as Edward Ferrars, Charity Wakefield as Marianne Dashwood, David Morrissey as Colonel Brandon, and Dominic Cooper as Willoughby, is the fourth screen version of this book as far as I'm aware. I know a few fans didn't like that they chose to start it with the seduction of Eliza in order to appeal to a more modern audience, and I do agree that it was completely unnecessary. However, I don't object to it on the grounds that it is part of the story in the book and not an interpolation of the production team. The 1980 version of Pride and Prejudice, with Elizabeth Garvey as Elizabeth Bennet, David Rintoul as Mr. Darcy, Sabrina Franklin as Jane Bennet, Osmond Bullock as Charles Bingley, and Peter Settling as George Wickham. Adapted by British novelist Fay Weldon, this has a more theatrical feel than the later versions, but her use of the book's narration to enhance the dialogue keeps the feeling of the book intact. Mansfield Park 1983, with Sylvester Latouzel as Fanny Price, Nicholas Farrell as Edmund Bertram, Jackie Smith-Wood as Mary Crawford, Robert Burbage as Henry Crawford, and Anna Massey as Mrs. Norris. There's a lot to love about this miniseries, but it's not perfect, and I'd say this book is the most in need of a new faithful adaptation. Unfortunately, I very much doubt we will ever get one, because modern sensibilities seem to make Mary Crawford resonate more with the audience than Fanny Price. The 1972 adaptation of Emma, with Doran Godwin as Emma Woodhouse, John Carson as Mr. Knightley, Robert East as Frank Churchill, and Anaya Marsden as Jane Fairfax. Overall, I'd say Emma has been treated the most kindly by its adaptations, but this one still has the edge over the others. Again, it has that theatrical style that younger viewers seem to find harder to connect with, which I think is why it is often overlooked. Persuasion 1971, with Anne Furbank as Anne Elliot, Brian Marshall as Captain Wentworth, Charlotte Mitchell as Mrs. Penelope Clay, and David Seville as Mr. Elliot. Like the other older adaptations I've highlighted here, this brings an elegance and dignity to the characters, even when they're at their most ridiculous, that evokes the setting of the story. Northanger Abbey, 2007, with Felicity Jones as Catherine Morland, J.J. Field as Henry Tilney, Carrie Mulligan as Isabella Thorpe, William Beck as John Thorpe, and Sylvester Latouzel as Mrs. Allen. I won't say this version didn't take some liberties, but it's still a charming rendition with some great performances. Lady Susan, or Love and Friendship, made in 2016, with Kate Beckinsale as Lady Susan Vernon. As far as I'm aware, this doesn't have any other adaptations, but I'm not listing it as the best by default. As a novella written in the form of letters and not published until many years after Jane Austen's passing, the events could only really be inferred. They still did a great job of bringing it to life. Some of you might be wondering at this point whether there should not be an 8th entry on this list. Well, like Charlotte Lucas, I decided to mention nothing that I cannot praise. Do you agree with my selections? Is this something you would like me to go into in more detail? Let me know in the comments.